Morning, y'all. It's Darrin here. I just got back from my Men in Momentum group. I've just discovered this through a new friend. It's kind of like the Inklings, and very excited. I've been there twice now, and one of the greatest things is that I would say more than half of the group is that are younger than me, perhaps, and so that is exhilarating to be around young men who have that flame of love for Christ in their hearts. And so we've been going through James, and the reason I'm coming to you today, however, is because I came home and I was looking for an extra copy in my C.S. Lewis collection of A Grief Observed and Problem with Pain. There was a fellow there that I could tell was really grieving the loss of his wife, and I just wanted to give him comfort. I've given those two books away to so many people over the years, and they really are. And there's also, I was struck by how expensive copies of them are. You can't even find one under $10. But there is also a really groovy little distillation of the two books. And I don't know how much of a reader this cat was, but this one is this beautiful little book on grief that is takes from both of the books, and then throughout C.S. Lewis's, there's parts in here from the Four Loves as well. So this one is really, I think you can get one of these for like $7 online. But anyways, and so as I was thumbing through my C.S. Lewis today, I could not help, first of all, let me just say that one of the greatest decisions I ever made in my life is to get the C.S. Lewis Bible. It is really a magnificent collection. Not only it's just a wonderful quality Bible. It's put up with the heavy writing, and it just, for me, if you got a book, it better be able to weather the storm and a lot of traffic. But the thing that's key about this is that you will find, like, for example, we were James 3 today. There's a little quote up here in the upper right-hand corner, after the James 2, which talks about how works do justify. There's a little quote up here that says, I'm often, I believe, praying for others when I should be doing things for them. It's so much easier to pray for a bore than to go and see him. Just little tidbits like that, or little excerpts that are at the bottom of the pages as well. And it has been a real treat for me, because it was C.S. Lewis that brought me back to Christ in 2008. I kind of fell into C.S. Lewis backwards through Abolition of Man. Russell Kirk was talking about it, a huge political hero of mine. And so I had to pick up this book. And then I just kept reading C.S. Lewis. It just seemed so very practical to me, so very, very brilliant. And then I read Screwtape Letters and Mere Christianity, and it was all over. I was back in the enemy's camp. And so just let me recommend, if you're looking for a new Bible, and I've been trying to read this get all the way through it every year. But for me, it's fun. I just leave it sitting at my table on the stand, and every day I'll just flip randomly to some new page, and it's like the Holy Spirit is opening that page for me, because it's so often I find exactly what I need that day. And so today it's interesting, because as I was looking for copies of A Grief Observed, I pulled out one of my favorite books by C.S. Lewis, Beyond Personality. And there were only 2 editions published of this tiny book. And I'm very fortunate. As I was looking for the other ones, I looked up whether I could get one of these, because this one, I wondered why I hadn't highlighted in it. And I realize now the reason is because you're not going to find one of these for under $72. And so even one that doesn't have the cover was like $80. And so, although you can't hardly call this a cover, you can kind of see what it looks like. So this book is so good that I'm just going to read you the first 18 or so pages. I believe it's the first 2 chapters. The 3rd chapter, I love how he says it, that he says it's a very silly idea that in reading a book you must never skip. All sensible people will skip freely when they come to a chapter which they find is going to be no good to them. And so let me just pick it up from the start here. I'm actually going to read the preface as well. He says, these talks attempt to put into simple modern language the account of God which, to the best of my knowledge, the vast majority of Christian churches have agreed in giving for a great many centuries. I have tried to explain in previous talks why I think Christianity is true. Here I'm not trying to prove anything, only to describe what Christian belief is. It is hoped that this may be of some use to both those who accept Christianity and those who don't. Indeed, it is not much good discussing whether certain beliefs are true before we know what they are. Some listeners were offended because I used the word Christian belief to describe the doctrines officially held by organized Christianity at nearly all times in nearly all countries. They themselves, though claiming to be Christians, differed from this official belief on certain points. And they were annoyed because I seemed to be saying that they were therefore no Christians. And who's he, they asked, to lay down who is Christian and who is not? In reality, I was not attempting, in the sense that they mean, to lay down anything of the sort. If anyone was asked to give an account, say, of Mohammedanism, in 7 very short talks, he would be forced to concentrate on the general Mohammedan tradition. He simply wouldn't have time to go into minor variations, still less to deal with the beliefs in individual Mohammedans. In his talks, the word Mohammedanism would simply have to be used to mean the permanent central tradition. I dealt with Christianity in the same way. I should have had to do so, even if I personally did not regard the central tradition of Christianity as its truest. In point of fact, I do regard it as true, and consequently, I must think that those who depart from it are mistaken. Some people say this attitude is intolerant. He's the sort of man, they complain, who thinks his own beliefs are true and everyone else's are wrong. But after all, how can any man help do that? How can any man help doing that? A man must think his own beliefs true, because if he didn't, it would not be his belief. Your belief means that what you think is true. And if you think one thing true, of course you must think the opposite false. But this is a very different meaning from saying that those who hold opposite beliefs are necessarily bad or stupid. A great lesson for politics here. There is a deeper sense of the word Christian, in which some who hold wrong beliefs may be more Christian than some who hold the right ones. Christ, that's such a very important point here. And this is that Christian humility where you go in and you hang out with men who perhaps haven't read all these books, haven't spent the time, delving in to the millennia of theology that's developed. But these are far better men than me. And they've lived their life imitating Christ far more than I have. And so, that's the whole thing. Is, as Uncle Screwtape would tell us, the devil's favorite sin is spiritual pride. And so back to the book here. He says that, I'm just going to read that again here. There's a deeper sense of the word Christian in which some who hold wrong beliefs may be more Christian than some who hold the right ones. Christ, who can see into their hearts, may recognize them as his own, and more his own than many of the orthodox. Needless to say, I have never dreamed of laying down who is Christian in that sense. It would have been the greatest imprudence for me even to raise the question, for neither I nor any mortal can possibly know the answer. Making and Begetting, Chapter 1. Everyone has warned me not to tell you what I'm going to tell you in these talks. They all say the ordinary listener doesn't want theology. You give him plain practical religion instead. I have rejected their advice. I don't think that the ordinary listener is such a fool. Theology means the science of God, and I think any man who wants to think about God at all would like to have the clearest and most accurate ideas about him which are available. You're not children. Why should you be treated like children? In a way, I quite understand why some people are put off by theology. I remember once I'd been given a talk to the Royal Air Force. An old, hard-bitten officer got up and said, I've got no use for all that stuff, but mind you, I'm a religious man too. I know there's a God. I've felt him out alone in the desert at night. The tremendous mystery. And that's just why I don't believe all your neat little dogmas and formulas about him. To anyone who's met the real thing, all these dogmas seem so petty and pedantic and unreal. Now, in a sense, I quite agreed with this man. I think he probably had a real experience of God in the desert. And when he turned from that experience to the Christian creeds, I think he was really turning from something quite real to something less real. In the same way, if a man has once looked at the Atlantic from a beach and then goes and looks at a map of the Atlantic, he will also be turning from something more real to something less real, turning from real waves to a bit of colored paper. But here comes the point. The map is only colored paper, but there are things you have to remember about it. In the first place, it is based on what hundreds and thousands of people have found out by sailing the real Atlantic. In that way, it has behind it masses of experience just as real as the ones you could have from the beach. Only, while yours would be a single isolated glimpse, the map fits all those different experiences together. In the second place, if you want to go anywhere, the map is absolutely necessary. As long as you're content with walks on the beach, your own glimpses are far more fun than looking at a map. But the map is going to be more use than walks on the beach if you want to get to America. Well, theology is like the map. Merely learning and thinking about the Christian doctrines, if you stop there, is less real and less exciting than the sort of thing my friend got in the desert. Doctrines aren't God. They're only a kind of map. But that map is based on the experiences of hundreds of people who really were in touch with God, experiences compared with which any thrills or pious feelings you and I are likely to get on our own very elementary and are very elementary and confused. And secondly, if you want to get any further, you must use the map. You see, what happened to that man in the desert may have been real and was certainly exciting, but nothing comes from it. It leads nowhere. There's nothing to do about it. In fact, that's just why a vague religion, all about feeling God and nature and so on, is so attractive. It's all thrills and no works. Like watching the waves from the beach. But you won't get to Newfoundland by studying the Atlantic in that way. And you won't get eternal life by feeling the presence of God in flowers and music. Neither will you get anywhere by looking at maps without going to sea. And you won't be very safe if you go to sea without a map. In other words, theology is practical, especially now. In the old days, when there wasn't much education or discussion, perhaps it was possible to get on. And here's probably the most popular quote from this book, right here on page 3. In other words, theology is practical, especially now. In the old days, when there wasn't much education or discussion, perhaps it was possible to get on with very few simple ideas about God, but it isn't now. Everyone reads, everyone hears things discussed. Consequently, if you do not listen to theology, that won't mean that you have no ideas about God. It'll mean that you'll have a lot of wrong ones. Bad, muddled, out-of-date ideas. For a great many of the ideas about God, which are trotted out as novelties today, are simply the ones which real theologians tried centuries ago and rejected. To believe in the popular religion of modern England is simply putting the clock back, like believing the earth is flat. For when you get down to it, isn't the popular idea of Christianity just this? That Jesus Christ was a great moral teacher, and that if only we took his advice, we might be able to establish a better social order and avoid another war. Now, mind you, that is quite true, but it tells you very little about Christianity, and it has no practical importance at all. It's quite true that if we took Christ's advice, we should soon be living in a happier world. You needn't even go as far as Christ. If we all did all that Plato or Aristotle or Confucius taught us, we'd get on a great deal better than we do. And so what? We never have followed the advice of the great teachers. Why are we likely to begin now? Why are we more likely to follow Christ than any of the others? Because he's the best moral teacher? If we can't take the elementary lessons, is it likely that we are going to take the most advanced ones? If Christianity only meant one more bit of good advice, then Christianity is of no importance. There's been no lack of good advice for the last 4,000 years. A bit more makes no difference. But as soon as you look at any real Christian writings, you find that they are talking about something quite different from this popular religion. They say that Christ is the Son of God, whatever that means. They say that those who give him their confidence can also become sons of God, whatever that means. They say that his death saved us from our sins, whatever that means. There's no good complaining that these statements are difficult. Christianity claims to be telling us about another world, about something behind the world that we can touch and hear and see. You may think the claim false, but if it were true, what it tells us would be bound to be difficult. At least as difficult as modern physics, and for the same reason. A little something for all my scientist friends and devout atheists. Now, the point of Christianity, which gives us the greatest shock, is the statement that by attaching ourselves to Christ, we can become sons of God. One asks, aren't we sons of God already? Surely the Father of God is one of the main Christian ideas. Well, in a certain sense, no doubt, we are sons of God already. I mean, God has brought us into existence and loves us and looks after us, and in that way is like a father. But when the Bible talks about our becoming sons of God, obviously it must mean something different. And that brings us up against the very center of theology. One of the creeds says that Christ is the Son of God, begotten, not created or not made. And it adds begotten by his Father before all worlds. Will you please get it quite clear that this has nothing to do with the fact that when Christ was born on earth as man, that man was the son of a virgin? Will you please get it quite clear that this has nothing to do with the fact that when Christ was born on earth as man, that man was the son of a virgin? We are not now thinking about virgin birth. We are thinking about something that happened before nature was created at all, before time began, before all worlds. Christ is begotten, not created. What does that mean? We don't use the words like begetting or begotten much in modern English, but everybody still knows what they mean. To beget is to become the father of. To create is to make. And the difference is just this. When you beget something of the same kind as yourself. A man begets human babies. A beaver begets little beavers. And a bird begets eggs which turn into little birds. But when you make something of a different kind from yourself. A bird makes a nest. A beaver builds a dam. A man makes a wireless set. Or he may make something more like himself than a wireless set, say a statue. If he's a clever enough carver, he may make a statue which is very like a man indeed. But of course, it's not a real man. It only looks like one. It can't breathe or think, and it's not alive. Now, that's just the first thing to get clear. What God begets is God, just as what man begets is man. What God creates is not God, just as what man makes is not man. That is why men are not sons of God in the sense that Christ is. They may be like God in certain ways, but they are not things of the same kind. They are more like statues or pictures of God. Man made in his image. They're made in his image. A statue has the shape of man, but it's not alive. And in the same way, man has, in a sense I'm going to explain, a shape or likeness of God, but he has not got the kind of life God has. Let's take the first point, man's resemblance to God first. Everything God has made has some likeness to himself. Space is like him in its hugeness. Not that the greatness of space is the same kind of greatness as God's, but it's a sort of symbol of it, or a translation of it into non-spiritual terms. Matter is like God in having energy, though. Again, of course, physical energy is a different kind of thing from the power of God. The vegetable world is like him because it is alive, and he is the living God. But life in this biological sense is not the same as the life there in God. It is only a kind of symbol or shadow of it. When we come on to the animals, we find other kinds of resemblances in addition to biological life. The intense activity and fertility of the insects, for example, is a first dim resemblance to the unceasing activity and creativeness of God. In the higher mammals, we get the beginnings of instinctive affection. That isn't the same thing as the love that exists in God, but it is like it, rather in a way that a picture drawn on a flat piece of paper can nevertheless be like a landscape. When we come to man, the highest of animals, we get the completest resemblance to God, which we know of. There may be creatures in other worlds who are more like God than man is, but we don't know about that. Man not only lives, but loves and reasons. Biological life reaches its highest known level in him. But what we mean in his natural condition has not got, but what man in his natural condition has not got is spiritual life, the higher and different sort of life that exists in God. We use the same word life for both, but if you thought that both must therefore mean the same sort of thing, that would be like thinking that the greatness of space and the greatness of God were the same sort of greatness. In reality, the difference between biological life and spiritual life is so important that I'm going to give these two distinct names. The biological sort, which comes to us through nature, and which, like everything else in nature, is always tending to run down and decay so that it can only be kept up by incessant subsidies from nature in the form of air, water, food, etc. This he calls bios. Bios. The spiritual life, which is in God from all of eternity and which made the whole natural universe, is Zoe. Z-O-E. Bios has, to be sure, a certain shadowy or symbolic resemblance to Zoe, but only the sort of resemblance there that is between a photo and a place, or a statue and a man. A man who has changed from having bios to having Zoe would have gone through as big a change as a statue which changed from being a carved stone into a real man. And that is just precisely what Christianity is about. This world is a great sculpture shop. We are the statues, and there is a rumor going around that there is, check that over. This is such a great line. And that is just precisely what Christianity is about. This world is a great sculpture shop. We are the statues, and there's a rumor going around the shop that some of us are someday going to come to life. The second chapter, the three-personal God. Last week I was talking about the differences between begetting and making. A man begets a child, but he only makes a statue. God begets Christ, but he only makes men. But by saying that, as I've illustrated, only one point about God, namely that what God the Father begets is God, something of the same kind as himself. In a way, it is like human father begetting a human son, but not quite like it. So I must try to explain a little more. A good many people say nowadays that I believe in God, but not in a personal God. They feel that mysterious something, which is behind all other things, must be more than a person, they feel. Now the Christian quite agree, but the Christians are the only people who offer any idea of what a being that is beyond personality could be like. All the other people, though they say God is beyond personality, really think of him as something impersonal. That is, as something less than personal. If you are looking for something super personal, something more than a person, then it isn't a question of choosing between Christian idea and the other idea. The Christian idea is the only one on the market. Again, some people think that after this life, or perhaps after several lives, human souls will be absorbed into God. But when they try to explain what they mean, they seem to be thinking of our being absorbed into God as one material is absorbed into another. They say it's like a drop of water slipping into the sea. But of course, that's the end of the drop. If that's what happens to us, then being absorbed into is the same as ceasing to exist. It's only the Christians who have any idea of how human souls can be taken into the life of God and yet remain themselves. In fact, being very much more themselves than they were before. I warned you that theology is practical. The whole purpose for which we exist is to thus be taken into a life of God. Wrong ideas about what life is, what that life is, will make it harder. And now for a few minutes, I must ask you to follow rather carefully. You know that in space you can move in three ways: left, right, backwards, forwards, and up and down. Every direction is either one of these three or a compromise between them. They are called the three dimensions. Now notice this. If you're using only one dimension, you can only draw a straight line. If you're using two, you can draw a figure, say a square. And a square is made up of four straight lines. Now a step further. If you have three dimensions, you can then build what is called a solid body, say a cube, a thing like a dice or a lump of sugar. And a cube is made up of 6 squares. Do you see the point? A world of one dimension would be a world of straight lines. In a two-dimensional world, you still get straight lines, but many lines make one figure. And in a three-dimensional world, you still get figures, but many figures make one solid body. In other words, as you advance to more real and more complicated levels, you don't leave behind the things you found on the simpler levels. You still have them, but combined in new ways. In ways you couldn't imagine if you only knew the simpler levels. Now, the Christian account of God involves just the same principle. The human level is a simple and rather empty level. On the human level, one person is one being, and any two persons are two separate beings, just as in two dimensions, say on a flat sheet of paper. One square is one figure, and any two squares are two separate figures. On the divine level, you still find personalities, but up there you find them combined in new ways, which we, who don't live on that level, can't imagine. In God's dimension, so to speak, you find a being who is three persons while remaining one being. Just as a cube is 6 squares while remaining one cube. Of course, we can't fully conceive of a being like that, just as if we were so made that we perceived only two dimensions in space, we could never properly imagine a cube. But we can get a sort of a faint notion of it. And when we do, we are then, for the first time in our lives, getting some positive idea, however faint, of something super personal, something more than a person. It is something we could never have guessed, and yet once we have been told, one almost feels one ought to have been able to guess it, because it just fits in so well with all the other things we know already. You may ask, if we can't imagine a personal being, what is the good of talking about him? Well, there isn't any good in talking about him. The thing that matters is being actually drawn into that three-personal being, that three-personal life. And that may begin at any time, tonight, if you like. What I mean is this: an ordinary simple Christian kneels down to say his prayers. He is trying to get in touch with God. But if he is a Christian, he knows that what is prompting him to pray is also God. God, so to speak, inside him. But he also knows that all his real knowledge of God comes through Christ, the man who was God. That Christ is standing beside him, helping him pray, praying for him. You see what is happening? God is the thing beyond the whole universe to which he is praying. the goal he's trying to reach. God is also the thing inside him, which is pushing him on, the motive power. God is also the road or the bridge along which he is being pushed to that goal. So that the whole threefold of life, the threefold life of the three-personal being, is actually going on in that ordinary little bedroom where an ordinary man is saying his prayers. The man is being caught up into a higher kind of life, what I call Zoe, or spiritual life. He is being pulled into God, by God, while still remaining himself. And that is how theology started. People already knew about God in a vague way. Then came a man who claimed to be God. And yet, he wasn't the sort of man you could dismiss as a lunatic. He made them believe him. They met him after they'd seen him killed. And then, after they had been formed into a little society or community, they found God somehow inside them as well, directing them, making them able to do things they couldn't do before. And when they worked it all out, they found they'd gotten the Christian definition of the three-personal God. You see, it isn't something made up. Theology is, in a sense, experimental knowledge. It's the simple religions that are the made-up ones. When I say it's an experimental science, in a sense, I mean that it's like other experimental sciences in some ways, but not in all. If you're a geologist studying rocks, you've got to go find the rocks. They won't come to you, and if you go to get them, they can't run away. The initiative, so to speak, lies all on your side. They can't either help or hinder. But suppose you're a zoologist and want to take photos of wild animals in their native haunts. Well, that's a little bit different than from studying rocks. The wild animals won't come up to you, but they can run away from you. And if you don't keep very quiet, they will. There's beginning to be a tiny little trace of initiative on their side. Now, a stage higher, suppose you really want to get to know a human person. If he's determined not to let you, you won't get to know him. You've got to win his confidence. In this case, the initiative is equally divided. It takes two to make a friendship. When you come to knowing God, the initiative lies on his side. If he doesn't show himself, nothing you can do will enable you to find him. And, in fact, he shows much more of himself to some people than to others. Not because he has favorites, but because it is impossible for him to show himself to a man whose whole mind and character are in the wrong condition. Just as sunlight, though it has no favorites, cannot be reflected in a dusty mirror as clearly as in a clean one. You can put this another way by saying that while in other sciences, the instruments you use are the things external to yourself, like microscopes and telescopes, the instrument through which you see God is your whole self, on the other hand. And if man's self isn't kept clean and bright, his glimpse of God will be blurred, like the moon seen through a dirty telescope. That's why horrible nations have horrible religions. They've been looking at God through dirty lenses. God can show himself as he really is only to a real man. And that means not simply to men who are individually good, but to men who are united together in a body, loving one another, helping one another, showing him to one another. For that is what God meant humanity to be like players in one band or organs in one body. Consequently, the one really adequate instrument for learning about God is the whole Christian community, waiting for him to gather. Christian brotherhood is, so to speak, the technical equipment for this science, the laboratory outfit. That's why all these people who turn up every few weeks with some patent, simplified religion of their own as a substitute for the Christian tradition are really just wasting your time. Like a man who has no instrument but an old pair of field glasses setting out to put all of the real astronomers right. He may be a clever chap. He may be cleverer than some of the real astronomers, but he isn't giving himself a chance. And 2 years later, everyone has forgotten all about him, but the real science is still going on. If Christianity was something we were making up, of course, we could make it easier, but it isn't. We can't compete in simplicity with people who are inventing religions. How could we? We're dealing with fact. Of course, anyone can be simple if he has no facts to bother about. God bless you all. Thanks for listening.